Welcome, everybody. My name is Suzy Engwall. I'm the Senior Director of Global Business Development here at PRIA Healthcare. I will be moderating today's conversation, and today we are really excited to welcome this great panel of experts. So first on our list, we've got Dr. Brian Solow. He is a physician executive and market access and payer strategy expert, and also the former CMO of OptumRX and Optum Life Sciences, which are part of UnitedHealth Group. We also have with us Tonya Dowd, Executive Vice President of Reimbursement and Health Economics here at PRIA Healthcare, and Sam Murray, Head of Regulatory and Quality here at PRIA. Just to kind of set the stage for you guys before we dive in, I want to just talk a little bit about FDA breakthrough. So FDA breakthrough device designation, it gets a ton of attention, and it should. It clearly opens doors. But over the years, what we've seen over and over again is companies win breakthrough device designation and they treat it like it's a finish line. It's really just the beginning of a much harder conversation. Clearance is not coverage, approval is not adoption, and breakthrough is not a business model. So today we're going to have a very frank and practical conversation about what breakthrough designation really gets you. We'll also talk about how it connects or doesn't to emerging programs like TAP, Rapid, and Tempo. I know you're all excited about Rapid, so we'll make sure that's in there for sure, as well as what smart medtech innovators should be doing right now to set themselves up for commercial success on the other side of regulatory clearance. So by the end of this session, you should be able to distinguish what FDA breakthrough device designation and the emerging FDA/CMS coordination programs like TAP, TSET, Rapid, and Tempo actually deliver versus the coverage and reimbursement assumptions that they usually invite. You'll leave with a practical framework for building clinical and economic evidence strategy that address both regulatory clearance and payer coverage. So we're going to jump right in, but if you have questions along the way, please use the Q&A section located at the top of your top of the screen. I think it's the second little icon over. Please use that section. We'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. And before we jump in, I would like to have each of our panelists just give a proper introduction and talk a little bit about themselves and their background. So let's hand it off to Dr. Solow first.
Thank you, Suzy, and thank you, PRIA, for inviting me to this, what I think will be a nice, engaging, informative session. I started my career as a practicing family physician, and I think over those 25 almost years, I realized that medicine just doesn't happen in a vacuum, and I got interested in this resource containment and incentives and understanding evidence for my patients. Quickly got into managed care, executive roles, and that led me to almost my last 20 at UnitedHealth Group, where I did serve as Chief Medical Officer of their Pharmacy Benefit Manager, OptumRX, and then the Data Analytics Group, where we evaluated devices, technology, products in the life sciences. So again, thanks for having me, and I know it'll be a great discussion.
Thank you so much for being here. Tonya, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Suzy. Really appreciate it. And Dr. Solow, thank you for joining us, as well as Sam. I'm Tonya Dowd, Executive Vice President of Reimbursement, Health Economics, Market Access, and Corporate Development here at PRIA. I've spent most of my career in the medtech reimbursement market access space, about 25 plus years. And I really oversee all of our strategic engagements here at PRIA. I was spent about 12 and a half years at J&J prior to coming to PRIA, and with two other consulting firms really developing and managing their reimbursement and market access service lines. So it's great to be here and really look forward to the conversation today. I'll pass it to Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Tonya. Excited to really merge these two paradigms together so we can kind of talk to them and how they interact and weave together. I lead PRIA's regulatory and quality division here, helping companies from the we have a great idea to the ones that already have we need to get this through FDA, and then even further on. I've spent about half my time in the private sector, about 10 years in the private sector, half of that doing independent consulting. And before that, I was in the government, the last stint being with the FDA in their Office of Regulatory Affairs. So excited to chat more about the topics today.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so glad to have the three of you here today. We're going to jump right in and talk about what breakthrough actually means. So we're going to start a little bit simple. So Sam, I'm going to hit you up first. Let's start at the foundation. What is FDA breakthrough device designation? Who is it designed for, and what does a company gain by pursuing it?
Yeah, so it's designed for people with innovative technologies that are so breakthrough has to meet the first criteria. So it has to be a more effective treatment or diagnosis for a serious condition, either life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating. And so that's kind of who the program is designed for. And it's also one part about some people miss is it's also designed for people who need help getting that product to market. That's interactive discussions with FDA, which is maybe more than what a usual company might need or a sponsor might need. So that's what it's for. It has to have technical success, show technical success and clinical success before they grant that designation. So that's sort of the basic going in. And then the second criteria is that innovation part.
And what does a company gain by pursuing it? Like, what's the benefit of getting it?
They get sprint discussions. So that's that interactive bit. So they get a single topic sprint discussion every 40 days, or that's how long the feedback cycle is. So you can ask iteratively throughout the design process. You can do data development plans with FDA, and you can do clinical trial protocols and get their feedback. So all those programs are already available through a pre-submission Q-Sub process as well. So it's not much different, but if you use it effectively, it theoretically gets you that access quicker and on a more continuing basis. So that's the advantages of being in.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And the next question is kind of for you and Tonya both. Breakthrough designation, it doesn't guarantee coverage or payment. So Sam, from the regulatory side, how do you set realistic expectations with a client who comes in thinking that breakthrough is, this golden ticket?
Yeah, so when they come in, it's really I kind of draw the line to say that they need to have how they're going to use the program. On the regulatory side, getting breakthrough doesn't get you any closer to a marketing authorization at all. It's how you use the program. So a lot of companies I talk to have had breakthrough for 2-3 years and have never even engaged FDA on another topic or conversation. That's someone who probably did it for a press release, or probably did it for maybe one of these programs Tonya's going to talk about, but they aren't using it to the regulatory advantage. And so that's sort of the first part. The second part is I want to separate it from, just because FDA says it's breakthrough, I want to separate that value is different than a patient or a customer who might find value in it. They're definitely looking at two different things with some areas that overlap. So don't think that just because FDA is granted breakthrough that all of a sudden people are going to be buying this, or payers are going to be reimbursing it.
Perfect, thank you. And Tonya, from your perspective, from the reimbursement side, what do you wish every breakthrough designated company understood before they started these coverage conversations?
Well, that's a great question, Suzy. And I would say that, with respect even to the last slide, the slide that we have up here, I get a lot of feedback from clients, kind of with the assumption that we go to FDA, we get either market authorization or approval, with or without breakthrough, and then we go to CMS, and then automatically and magically we have reimbursement and market access, right? Coding, coverage, and payment, and even benefit category. And that's certainly not the case. In the US, unlike with FDA, that's one agency that you're going to achieve, again, marketing authorization or FDA approval. But as it relates to reimbursement and market access, the buck doesn't stop essentially with CMS. You're dealing with a multitude of different stakeholders, different coding authorities, the American Medical Association, CMS. You're dealing with specialty societies. You're dealing with payers, and not just CMS. We're talking about all of the different payer entities. So really, really understanding how your technology is going to be paid is important. In the simplest sense, when we think about reimbursement, it's really truly just about what is your business model, and as a sustainable business model, who is going to pay for your technology? When are they going to pay for the technology? Under what circumstances will they pay for the technology? And those are really the key questions to ask. It's not necessarily about, I made this new and great technology or device, and automatically I know it should be getting additional reimbursement. That's not necessarily the case all the time. So, I'm really looking forward to getting into the details here around what the agencies, the FDA and CMS, have done in terms of pushing forward and shepherding some of these programs that we'll talk about today as it relates to, potential benefits of having breakthrough in terms of the evolving kind of coverage programs that we'll talk about today. And then even still the evolving payment programs, which have been established and have been utilized to establish, new and novel payment methodologies for technologies, but those are evolving too. And we'll talk more about that today.
That's great. And, my key takeaway from all of that was, you're right, there's no magical, like, I get this and then this happens. It's not magical. There's so much that goes into it. So I really appreciate that answer. Dr. Solow, let's turn to you for a second. When a breakthrough designated device lands on the payer's desk, does that designation move the needle at all? And what weight, if any, does it really carry on that coverage decision?
Got it. Well, let me first state something now, because it's an interesting time to be a payer, right? I think we all can appreciate that. We're often misunderstood. There's no doubt about that. We're not trying to say no. Remember, we're trying to think about, one, does it work? Who does it work for? And is there enough evidence to justify that broad adoption and resource allocation, which are, finite. So breakthrough designation, I think that it gets my attention as a payer and someone who is making those decisions, okay, whether device, drug, doesn't matter, but it doesn't get you coverage. And I think that's going to be a recurring theme throughout this discussion. The designation tells me that the FDA sees the potential for meaningful clinical impact, all right? And they want to accelerate the development. That's important, but it's mainly in Sam's shop. It's a regulatory signal, not an evidence signal. I think that's the important part here.
Huge. Yeah. That's huge. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people miss, especially early in the journey or first-time founders. So with that, let's kind of go into our next segment and talk a little bit about some of these programs that are out there: TAP, TSET, Rapid, Tempo, and the emerging landscape around them. I'm going to start with Tonya. So these programs that we just mentioned, they're not household names, even in medtech circles, right? It's not something that people wake up in the morning and they're like, let me think about NTAP today. Can you walk us through what each one of these are and what the problems that it's meant to solve, and where they currently stand in the world of, in the terms of real world traction? And I'd like to hear an answer from Sam as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna simplify it for a minute and just focus on Rapid and TSET from a coverage standpoint, and then the NTAP and TPT from a payment standpoint. And we have a beautiful slide that actually goes over all of these different programs, which we'll bring up in just a second. But if we think about the kind of three key pillars, and I'm going to add a fourth, the three key pillars of reimbursement, it is coverage, coding, and payment. Okay, so kind of keeping that in your mind, as well as the benefit category, which is the foundational aspect of really, how is this going to be coded, how is it going to be covered, and how is it going to be paid, right? So if we think about the two programs from a coverage standpoint that CMS and FDA are establishing, and CMS in particular, we have the Rapid program. And that is really a press release at this point. It hasn't been finalized. We are awaiting, the industry is awaiting the really the policy publication. And then from there, there's a 60-day comment period that has to follow, which, allows the industry and the public at large to provide comments for or against it, et cetera. But really the Rapid program is really and by the way, the Rapid, the acronym stands for Regulatory Alignment for Predictable and Immediate Device Coverage. And again, provides, coverage for that device based on a CMS and FDA interagency agreement, and really aligning on what evidence is going to be needed to provide coverage under a national coverage decision or NCD process that already exists for breakthrough devices. And if it's a class 3 device, it can automatically go into Rapid. If it's a class 2, it has to be part of the TAP program, which I'm going to have Sam talk about. But that's kind of, that's Rapid. And again, there's no other information we have aside from really what I just provided in a nutshell. TSET, on the other hand, the Transitional Coverage for Emerging Technologies program, has been around. It's very limited still, and it's actually on hold based on the RAPID program. So that's on hold right now. It is kind of, as the agencies look at how they're going to implement RAPID, if they are, they're putting TSET on hold. But TSET, again, is really just coverage under a national coverage decision with coverage with evidence development protocol for a limited amount of time for breakthrough designated devices. Now, most importantly, TSET only is taking 5 applications a year. And if we think about the number of breakthrough designated devices, the numbers don't align, certainly. So it's very, very, very limited, just to kind of make that clear. So that's RAPID and TSET. Again, just the coverage piece, right? If we kind of move into the payment piece, we have the new technology add-on payment, or NTAP. That is a mechanism that CMS has established, and it's been in play for a number of years, that incentivizes hospitals for inpatient procedures under the inpatient prospective payment system to achieve an additional payment for a new and novel device if it meets NTAP criterion. The 3 criterion that you have to meet if you do not have breakthrough designation are you have to be new, you have to make sure that you can show that you are substantially clinically better or substantial clinical improvement, and you have to meet the cost criterion. So your cost is not insignificant based on the cost that you would be under a DRG. If you have breakthrough, you only have to meet the cost criterion, not the other 2. Now, this is in play with the proposed rule that CMS came out with a few months ago, and it really proposing to take away that alternative payment pathway. So the industry is waiting on bated breath about that. We're also awaiting, because they have alluded to on the outpatient side, I'm going into transitional TPT, transitional pass-through payment. That's the same thing as NTAP essentially on the outpatient side. So incentivizing hospitals to utilize the technology for a 2 to 3 year time period with an additional payment. Again, you have to meet similar criteria. And if you have breakthrough status, you only have to meet that cost criterion. So, but again, CMS alluded to in the inpatient prospective payment system proposed rule, that they would modify the TPT pathway as well. So we're waiting. These are evolving, just as the RAPID and TSET are evolving. NTAP and TPT are really also evolving. One thing I do want to mention is, again, going back to the coverage and payment piece, you can see that I've mentioned nothing about coding in any of these programs. They are not satisfying the coding situation. So again, having all of the pillars is important, and do want to recognize that there's some gaps here essentially.
Perfect. Appreciate that.
That was long-winded. I apologize, but
no, this is great information. And Sam, did you want to comment on a couple of these programs as well?
Yeah, I can kind of fill in some of the gaps there. You saw the Venn diagram where we have some of those middle ones. So breakthrough, and we covered, and STEP. It's worth mentioning here just because it does get you into that TAP program. STEP is similar to breakthrough. You just don't meet the first criteria of the life-saving or higher risk type technology. But in both cases, if you are granted the designation into either of those programs, you can apply to TAP. Like Dr. Solow said, FDA is trying their best to get these technologies to patients, so they're doing their part on the regulatory side. So what TAP does is it allows them to bring in non-FDA perspectives. These are like patient groups, professional societies, reimbursement experts, payers, CMS. And what they do is they allow you access to them and those perspectives so that you can help develop your test plans and other things that you're going to do through this journey of marketing authorization, but with those perspectives in mind. So that's kind of FDA's, that's what they're trying to do with the program. It's still a fairly new program, and they're still actively enrolling and increasing who can apply. So the next one I'll talk about is Tempo. Since Tonya covered RAPID pretty much, but Tempo is definitely different than the rest of them. What Tempo is FDA and CMS together trying to basically lower the burden of healthcare in very specific ways, low risk devices, digital health devices that allow you to go to a CMS access facility and enter into their access model. So you use a Tempo approved technology in a CMS access facility, and that facility now gets payment. So it's not a fee for service payment. They're paid per beneficiary. And what FDA has found is that what they want to do is accelerate their part to get that technology there. So they grant enforcement discretion. The goal was mostly to advance them through enforcement discretion on marketing authorization specifically. So you don't have to have that 510K. They will allow you to commercialize without it. They'd still note though that at some point they will remove that enforcement discretion. So all these, any of these companies and sponsors should know that they still need that as part of the development plan, but allows them to get into those facilities quicker, to generate revenue faster, and hopefully FDA's goal is now they're going to get real world data to support that eventual marketing authorization. So that's what Tempo is. To cover just the last bit on Rapid, Tonya covered it pretty well, is the whole goal, the announced goal is that you would get your marketing authorization at the same time you get your CMS coverage, is what the goal would be. So once again, you do have to be breakthrough or class 3 device to enter into that program, and they help you develop your evidence strategy, both on the clinical safety and effectiveness side, but also on the outcome side, so that you can hit both of those at the same time.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. I'm going to jump to Dr. Solow. These programs really represent an attempt to create an earlier signal between FDA and CMS. From your experience inside a large payer, is that the right problem to solve? And are these programs solving it?
So I think absolutely it's the right problem. Let's start there. The biggest problem with in medtech isn't the FDA approval, in my opinion. It's sort of that valley between approval and reimbursement. And I know we keep talking about that reimbursement part, because unfortunately, and I've seen this both when I was at United and now working with other companies, there's some great technologies, but these companies after years go bankrupt because they struggled and they didn't get that approval and went through the right means to figure out that reimbursement. And regards, Suzy, to are they solving it? So I think they're moving in the right direction. We have a ways to go. I think, as Sam has alluded to, we're still early in the process, right?
Yeah.
And I think earlier, dialogue between CMS and FDA can help all of these folks on the phone who are with these medtech companies, to encourage that generation of evidence, which we're going to need. And that's going to serve multiple stakeholders. So I think there's a ways to go. We're in the right direction. We'll start there.
So you mentioned kind of that valley of death between FDA clearance and meaningful coverage. From the payer seat, what would a company need to show you to feel comfortable moving toward coverage?
Oh, it's just such an easy question, huh? That's all they need to do. But I think they need to keep it simple, in the sense there's sort of 4 things that I think about when I looked at those decisions from medical policy, evaluating these payer-wise. So clinical value, number 1. Does it improve meaningful outcomes? Number 2, comparative value, right? Is it better than existing alternatives? We've done that for years on the drug side, and we're doing it now on the device side more and more. Thirdly, the operational value. Can we implement it consistently? Because that's important, because large organizations like where I was at, this becomes a very big issue. And lastly, but as important, is that economic value, right? Does it improve outcomes enough to justify the costs? We're going to look at that. It becomes important because resources are finite and everybody's concerned about economics. So I think technologies that address all 4 of those points, they're going to move towards coverage much quicker.
Dr. Solow,
I love that.
Can I?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask one question. What about diagnostics? Dr. Solow. Tell us about how those, I think those have a maybe a higher level of evidence burden than maybe a medical device or a therapy.
Yeah, I still, Tonya, are you allowed to ask questions? I guess so, because
I
you're
can,
in
absolutely.
No,
She can do
I
whatever
always
she
have lots of
wants.
questions. So.
I know. So I actually consider those very similar. I think the evidence generation is as important. Diagnostics, do they have a higher bar, or do devices have a higher bar? I'm going to put them pretty equal, okay? Only in the sense that you still have to show the clinical value of that. Is it going to make a difference in outcomes? Those are big. The cost for some of those diagnostics may be less, but still it's going to come into play, and we're still asking for the same questions. So when I've seen that and evaluated that or rejected that or said that evil no to coverage, it's because the evidence generation wasn't there. But think of it in that same, sense of clinical, comparative, economic, and operational value, just like devices.
Perfect. Thank you. Tonya, one more question on this topic before we switch gears. What's a realistic timeline if you've got a well-prepared company that a company should really expect from clearance to coverage today? Or is there a standard?
That's an excellent question, and we have a saying in reimbursement, and I think those of you in the audience who are in the reimbursement realm will laugh. It depends, Suzy. It really depends. It depends on, it depends on so many different factors. The goal, the end goal, and the holy grail is to get to reliable and consistent coverage and reimbursement, right? That's the holy grail. And Stanford did an amazing analysis, really, of breakthrough designated devices and the time frame it took for broad-based coverage to be established for those technologies that had to go through establishing new coding pathways, coverage pathways, reimbursement pathways. And it was almost 5 years, 4.7 years. And so I think that's something that we can look at, and that's held true in my experience over the years. But really, it comes down to, honestly, Suzy, understanding, what stakeholders your technology is going to be, it is going to be subject to. So and the payer mix, the payer mix, understanding, is this a Medicare patient population? Is it a Medicaid patient population? Is it commercial payer Medicaid commercial payer population, and then really kind of breaking those down in terms of how is it going to be paid, where is it going to be paid, and under what type of business model as well. So, we're kind of largely talking right now about buy and bill models where the manufacturer is selling the product to a provider who submits a claim for reimbursement for that product. But there's also subscription models, right, where the manufacturer is actually contracting directly with the payer. So there's different levels of evidence based on a multitude of different things. So I think it's a really hard question to kind of answer, but I think the Stanford paper gives us something to really, a data point to point to.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to evidence strategy. And I know you just started to talk a little bit about stakeholders. So the evidence the FDA needs to grant clearance and the evidence payers need to grant coverage are not always the same thing. So Sam, let's start with you. How do you help clients think about building that clinical evidence strategy that's kind of serves both masters when you're looking at it from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, evidence generating is probably one of the most expensive things the company's going to go through, especially in the fledgling state. And so it's one that you don't want to have to repeat if at all possible. But it's also one that you don't want to balloon out and get you information that's not going to advance the company or basically put the company out of business, right? So you can't look at FDA in isolation though, because you're going to want to gather evidence that is hopefully going to please multiple parties and answer multiple questions. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. And so depending on the pathway that you're going to go down will depend on the evidence. If it's going to be a 510K pathway, you don't need some complex clinical study to get marketing authorization. So what you should do is focus that study that you're going to conduct, focus that on who the actual audience is going to be. And in that case, it's going to be the buyer or the payer, or even the market as a whole, depending if it's a consumer product. So that's kind of what I tell them. If they're going to go to FDA, there's obviously a Q-sub process that you can really ask and see what the FDA wants to see. But if you're going to do that, might as well go for breakthrough and try to get into TAP and ask the payers what they want to see too. So there's a couple different ways you can do and open up the input from and all the perspectives that are really going to matter for those high, those things are fairly expensive to do studies. So there's a lot that goes into it, but that's kind of what I look for in the advice I give.
Perfect. Appreciate that. Dr. Solow, where do you see the biggest disconnect between what FDA approves and what payers actually need to say yes?
So is there a disconnect? Yes, you are correct. And I think Sam stated that as well. I mean, FDA is evaluating whether technology is reasonably safe and effective. But the payers, we need evidence that it's going to improve those patient outcomes, as I talked about previously, relative to what's already out there. Because a lot of these technologies, devices, even the testing, as Tonya alluded to, we already have things for that. Do we need one more? What's going to be the incremental outcome? So the FDA is looking, at the single arm studies, and they're looking at the short follow-ups, but the payers, this is the disconnect. We want to see the comparative effectiveness, which we haven't seen often with the FDA. Longer term outcomes, better patient appropriate selection, because a lot of these are done in these small trials, and then real world performance. I know we're going to get to that. So I think my little soundbite there is, regulatory approval is usually the beginning of the evidence journey, not the end of it.
Makes sense. And so let's jump into that. Real world evidence and comparative effectiveness have become increasingly important in payer decision making. So how does RWE carry relative to RCT for data for novel device categories? And is that balanced? Are you starting to see it shifting?
You're asking me, I'm going to assume you're staying with me.
Yes, I am. I'm sticking with you.
No, it's okay. So real world evidence, real world data, and, having practiced a while back, this was never an issue. We never heard of that, right? And then there was a few data companies, but now look how many data companies there are where you can get data sets, claim sets, real world evidence, real world data from. So with that, it's increasingly significant, right? It's more right now as a complement rather than a replacement, for the randomized evidence. So that's what you're going to see. It's not going to be enough. I think real world evidence helps us think about, does it perform outside of the academic centers, which a lot of these studies are done in? And are these reproducible results in the communities? It helps us look at the complication rates, which we didn't always see. And durability is huge. We really want to see that. And then lastly, what patients will benefit the most from those technologies, whether it's testing or devices here in this discussion. And we often miss that. And as I talk to clients now, I say, can you narrow it down for us? Because we're never going to allow everyone to use this. Tell us who is it best for. So again, I think randomized trials tell me what can happen, but the real world evidence tells me what will usually happen.
I think I want to touch on something, Dr. Solow, that you just mentioned, and that was a narrow patient phenotype, right? And this is often where FDA and the payers, there's a little bit of conflict in terms of, or I'll just say market access. What you strive for in your FDA indication, and Sam would love to hear your thoughts too, is a broad indication, right? A very broad indication, not very specific, unless it's a breakthrough designation for a very specific, indication. But what the payers want to see, just like you said, Dr. Solow, is evidence that shows that the technology has a clinical and or economic or both impact on a very specific patient population. Maybe if Dr. Solow and Sam, if you can kind of both comment on those, that would be great, just from the regulatory standpoint and the commercial payer standpoint.
Yeah, from the regulatory standpoint, the broader your indication is, the more data you need to support that it's applicable to that patient population. But you typically want your indications broad enough that they're going to cover whatever commercial plans there are for now and then in the future, and balance that data load and data requirements with those indications. And FDA, and most times those indications, if it's a 510K or even sometimes a de novo, are bound by what the market already has in the predicates or what's written in the regulations already. And so you kind of are, maybe even you have very generic indications, like a technical claim and not a clinical based outcome claim in that indication. And so you can get marketing authorization with a fairly broad claim with not much data on some of those aspects that payers are going to want to narrow into. So my advice is always go as what broadly your budget can support and what ideally is best for the company, hopefully in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, as a pair though, so maybe it doesn't quite go against that, but we like that. We do like that funnel. We want to see that the manufacturers of the devices or testing have told us who is the ideal patient, because we're often afraid that, wow, this is great, everyone's going to want it. So it's okay to tell us, hey, this is the patient who it's for. Okay. It's just like in the drug world, same thing is, yeah, it's okay. We don't mind a prior authorization because they should do this, this, and this first. So it's really the same thing. But ones that can't tell us that, I think, are in more trouble than ones that can tell us the best population. And you'd be surprised, Tonya, how many of those manufacturers that we deal with are not able to define who this is best for. So I think that is key.
It is very key. Thank you.
Huge. Tonya, I want to ask you a couple questions about health economics and outcomes research. So HEOR often gets treated as sort of this late stage exercise. What is your perspective? You've been doing this a long time. When should people start? And what does a strong package actually need to include for a device that's seeking coverage?
They need to start yesterday during the R&D phase, really. Understanding a multitude of things strategically in planning, but definitely starting early on is important. Not waiting until you have FDA clearance or approval. That's way, 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 way too late. Like I said earlier, and I, the slide that we had up earlier, understanding your stakeholders, because the value is in the eye of the stakeholder. I always tell clients that. Who are your stakeholders? Understanding who those are. But I would say that, we always want to start with really looking at what is the clinical value that the technology is going to bring to, as we just said, a very specific patient population, and then really monetizing those outcomes. So I think a lot of people kind of look at reimbursement and health economics as kind of just one, it's that's all it is health economics, when really it's about what's the clinical value you're really bringing to the intended patient population that's going to resonate in the eye of the stakeholder. And if we think about the different kind of stakeholders here on the slide, again, it's going back to what stakeholders are you going to be really engaging with, and who's going to be relevant for your technology. And typically it's most all of these agencies and organizations if you're bringing a new and novel technology to market. But all of them have a different perspective, and different value propositions resonate. So, even with the coding authorities, with the American Medical Association, who owns and trademarks CPT codes, they have an evidence requirement for category 1 CPT codes, right? You have to have 5 peer-reviewed publications. I think that this ecosystem at large may not be aware of that. So you have to have, a certain level of evidence there. You have to have a different type of evidence for the hospital systems and the value analysis committees, or VACs, right? They want to know, what's the budget impact of bringing this into my hospital and the system, and for which patients, and so I think really just understanding and taking the time to do the primary research that you need to, not with friends and family who you're paying an honorarium to be around your scientific advisory board, but go to individuals who you're going to be interacting with once this technology is commercialized or even before, and understand what evidence they're going to need to really support the use and market adoption.
That's great. Fantastic answer. So I'm going to open it up a little bit to all three of you on this next question, and I really want to give some practical advice for some key takeaways. Start with some key takeaways here. So if a medtech founder is watching right now, pre-commercial, maybe they're pre-submission, what is one thing that you, from your perspectives, the chairs you guys sit in, that you wish they would do differently at this stage of the journey? Let's start with Sam from the regulatory perspective.
Yeah, I guess I wish they would they pressure test their ideas sooner, right? So that doesn't mean spend a lot of cash up front to get full-blown strategies developed, because there truly is maybe some decisions up in the air that you could end up going down and spending money, which isn't worth that route. But they need to pressure test what's available to them, what they're thinking, and so that's kind of what I wish they would do earlier. And it's not a huge it's a lot of benefit, and it's not a huge cost. So a lot of them, and this goes, speaking on the reimbursement side too, if they come and they want to engage FDA early, and they say, we're here early, we want to do this, but they don't even still understand who their patient is, like Tonya said, they got to go figure that out first. And so really understand that market. FDA, you can get through them, kind of like Dr. Solow said, it's not the hardest, it's not the longest pole in the tent. Find out who the patient is, and then, but if you pressure test that regulatory strategy first, I mean, as an example, maybe it's a wearable that isn't even a device, but the value of the company is to eventually turn this into a device where you can go forward and make a lot of money, but you can get on the market as a wearable consumer good, start collecting data and doing a lot of activity there. And if you knew that ahead of time, maybe you wouldn't have wasted 18 months through that, because you didn't know that path was available to you. So if they pressure tested that, I think that's sort of my advice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Solow, how about you? What's the one thing that you wish they would do differently at the stage of the journey when it comes from the payer perspective?
I only get one thing, huh, Suzy? So I think
you can maybe have two.
All right. I think the most important one thing is, and I've seen this, is start thinking about reimbursement from day one. Okay, I know that sounds trite, but it's so true. I've had so many companies come to me now and struggling, and I go, why are you thinking about this now? Or else they also got, and this is no plug, but they also got some bad advice. Oh, this will never be covered. Okay, who are they asking? You know, where's that from? And if they had just gone to the right people first, they would have gotten a different answer. I think they view reimbursement as a commercialization problem, okay, where to me, the reimbursement is more of an evidence strategy problem, right? So I just want them to think about who's going to pay, you know, what evidence are the payers going to require, what endpoints matter, what comparatives matter, all the things we talked about, and what economics matter. And if they did that from the very beginning, those would really help. And as Sam said, FDA, that's nothing. Yes, unfortunately, we still need FDA approval, so that's the barrier. But yes, sometimes we are the bigger barrier.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because I don't think, especially as a first-time founder in healthcare, I don't think that that's something that people realize until it's too late, that it is such a barrier. There's sort of this assumption that if a code exists, that maybe a predicate device or something used, that you're going to be able to sail through this, and that's just not the case. So I really appreciate that input. Tonya, from your perspective, what's something you wish people would do sooner?
Yeah, just like Dr. Solow said, I only get one because I have about a lot, but let me just summarize it quickly. You know, again, like I said earlier, the reimbursement plan is really your commercialization plan. How are you going to get this product into, you know, the hands, so to speak, or to patients that can benefit from it? It's your market access strategy, and it should be started, you know, again at the point of R&D, that R&D phase, because the regulatory strategy and how you develop the product implicates how it's going to be adapted downstream and vice versa. But what I would say is, you know, establishing reimbursement, your commercial plan, your market adoption, it's not a one-time event that just happens overnight. It's not as if, you know, we're establishing reimbursement and it's this one goalpost. It's a number of things, and it's an iterative process that takes a lot of patience over many years. And so I would say that, and I would say also, because we haven't used the term yet, but we can't get in this day and age through a webinar without saying AI. So I'm going to say it. Don't use AI as your, one and only reimbursement consultant. It has a place, but I would say go to reimbursement experts who have wisdom over, stagnant knowledge that you're going to get from AI. And I did a webinar several years ago called "Don't Go Code Shopping," right? Don't go and Google or AI a code and think that that's your reimbursement strategy, because let me tell you, your investors and strategics that are investing in you, and just the individuals who are going to be part of your technology, that's not sufficient. So anyway, that was long-winded, and I had more than one, but I think I summarized it quickly.
Well, I actually really like that last key point as somebody who sat in on so many of these investor presentations with people that are struggling and why can't I get funded? And they don't have their reimbursement strategy dialed in. It's a part of the story that you do need to know early. If you want to get funded, then it's going to be very important. So it's just another reason to look into this as early as possible.
And I have just one other comment on that note is, again, don't with respect to the programs we're talking about, I think it's amazing that FDA and CMS are working together and that we're coming up with some very innovative programs to establish an easier pathway to market access. But TSET is not your one and only, or RAPID is not your one and only reimbursement strategy, as we've talked about and articulated today. So I think that's the main takeaway. And breakthrough doesn't mean you automatically have an easier path from a market access reimbursement standpoint.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Sam, let's switch over to regulatory for just 1 second. Sort of the same question. When did a company need to start thinking about their regulatory strategy? Is it day one? Is it post-seed? And what's the cost of getting this timing wrong?
So I'm going to repeat what Tonya said, and that is you have to have your commercialization strategy on day one, right? Or that's when you want it. And part of that is that regulatory piece. It's part of the story. It's kind of how you get there to do the rest of those things. But you shouldn't look for some extremely expensive, long thing that's going to cost a ton of money and run you out of money on day one. But it's an iterative process, like Tonya said. You got to keep working through it. And yes, and don't use AI. It will love whatever idea you put in it and think it's the best thing. Really get some advice on how you can line up what patients and people are going to pay for and buy and what they need with that regulatory work. So that's kind of a gray answer, but definitely something they need to be considering on day one.
Perfect. So last question before we open it up to some Q&A. And if you guys do have questions, please put it in the Q&A box, not in the chat. So last question for each one of you. We'll start with Tonya. Looking at the regulatory to reimbursement landscape over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, what is a development that gives you the most optimism? And what's one thing that still kind of keeps you up at night?
Yeah, I think, I think through the work that I do at PRIA and we do with LSI and other, MedTech accelerators such as MedTech Innovator, it's really exciting to see all of the innovation out there, in the prevention and treatment of diseases with new and novel technologies. So I'm super excited about those technologies and the innovation that's out there. So I'm blessed to be able to see the innovation firsthand and to hear, the excitement from the innovators. I think that what keeps me up at night is our healthcare ecosystem with the respect from the reimbursement standpoint ready for, to take on these new innovations, and how are they going to be paid for? So I think that's the one thing that does keep me up at night. But again, going back to the topic for today, I think we're making strides in the right direction. And I think that's a great thing. But that's what I would say about that, is just making sure that we can really, really accommodate these technologies and pay for value versus volume.
Great answer. Dr. Solow, what about you? What's one development that gives you some optimism, and what's keeping you up at night?
You're very strict on this one, Suzy. But
I know.
So
you could probably squeeze in too.
Yeah, but I think there's 2 points. As a physician and a physician executive from a payer, but I'm going to use my physician roots first, is I'm really excited about all the technologies that are coming for my patients. I mean, I hate to use the California word of cool, but they're cool. These are going to be, just to me, some breakthrough technologies, testing, diagnostics that we need. So I'm optimistic in that realm that we're finally acknowledging that this reimbursement should not be an afterthought. Okay. Because I've seen just too many people come to me and say, I can't believe you guys won't cover this. How is that possible? This is the greatest thing. We have FDA approval, but we're finally acknowledging that. And then as far as keeping me up at night, I hope it's never anything. But if I was up at night, I think it's because we have this terrible system that we're asking all of these folks on the phone, and there are so many of you from all over the world I see, that we're asking you to navigate this difficult intersection between FDA, CMS, and payers. So until we better align that, I just hate to see that there's years spent trying to navigate that reimbursement, and we need to figure out how to shorten that to bring the proven technologies that we talked about, available to our patients.
That's great. Great answer. Sam, how about you? Same question.
Yes, similar flavor to Dr. Solow's. I think that having FDA and CMS, at least at the minimum, like the government come together to understand that this is an issue, right? Across administrations, they want to lower costs of patients and the overall burden on the healthcare system, right? Because that's both of those government organizations coming together to work towards doing that. If we think back of FDA trying to prevent snake oil from being sold, to now what they're trying to do is also accelerate programs and technologies that will actually help people, versus just being the gatekeeper. It's really impactful, and I think that's a good shift that they've done over the last them in Congress over the last 10 to 15 years. So that's a good thing. And I think what keeps me up is it's yet to be seen if they'll actually help. And one of the things that worries me is that founders and people rely on these programs and maybe even develop their strategies at these programs, and it doesn't actually help them. Or it focuses their attention on these acronyms and they don't focus on other things that could be more helpful to getting that technology to those patients. So that's it. I hope that people still use the programs. They're very impactful. They open a lot of doors, and so getting them early, and hopefully they do work out. Hopefully that's the plan. So.
Yeah, makes sense. We've got about 5 minutes left, maybe 8 minutes. We've got a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to kind of take one and distill it down into a question that I see asked all the time. And someone in the chat is asking, we've got a product that's higher cost than the predicate device or the other product that's out there that might be our competitor, and there's an existing code. What types of conversations should we have, and what type of information should we have ready before engaging with FDA and payers? So that is a very loaded question, but it's one I hear all the time. And I think having a code, hopefully you heard this loud and clear today, having code's not enough, but I'd love for you to kind of address that question. And Sam, do you want to start?
Yeah, one is FDA is typically not impacted by cost. Right? They don't, if you have an ASP higher than a competitor, it doesn't move the needle for them very much. I will say that I have used that argument, though, when it comes to availability and access, and cost is one of those access limiters. In a breakthrough in criteria 2, you can use it in a breakthrough discussion, and it will satisfy one of those. So if it's more available to more people because of cost, so more hospitals can have it, more rural communities can get a hold of it, that is one of them. And so you can use that. That's how I've used it in a marketing application. Cost does not factor in.
Great. Anybody else want to tackle that question? Tonya, I know you have something to say. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Solow.
I want to wait for Dr. Solow, please.
Oh, you want to wait for me? Okay, because I'll let you talk about the coding. But I mean, cost. Look, we evaluate these, and like we do in the drug world, we try to look at them first without the cost, okay? And we look at the evidence and everything, but we're going to come to cost. There's no doubt about it, because we we have our shareholders, we have our patients to worry about, we have lots of people to worry about. So we're still going to look at what incremental value. We're going to still look at the outcomes. We love total cost of care. That's the latest buzzword, I think, in the last several years. If you can demonstrate that even though it costs more, but it has downstream effects of reducing hospitalizations, reducing ER visits, that will be extremely helpful for the case. And oftentimes these companies haven't shown that, but they say it. But I think it's okay if you can prove that. We want to hear that as well. So it will come into play, but we're still going to have to look at all those other factors we talked about.
Yeah, makes total sense. Tonya?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to answer this question succinctly because there's a lot to it. But I would say that if we're just thinking about from a cost perspective and, this technology being the technology, I think that's asked in the question, being more costly, there has to be a value that's associated with that technology, right? From a coverage standpoint. But if we think about just the mechanisms that exist from the Medicare fee-for-service standpoint, it's not looking at the cost effectiveness, it's looking at cost additive, right? So if it is higher cost, making sure that the technology can be reimbursed if in fact the current codes that have been identified are applicable and based on where that technology is being performed. Is it a physician office? Is it an ambulatory surgery center? Is it an inpatient setting? So we have to really, there's different codes and different code sets. So kind of marrying those with the payment, but then understanding that the Medicare fee-for-service, payment methodology is not based on value. So it, may be reimbursed from a cost standpoint, but really doing, at PRIA, we do what we call a reimbursement landscape validation and assessment with a strategy development. So that's what I would recommend as the next step for this attendee in their question. There's a lot there to that question.
Absolutely, there is. We could probably spend an hour just on that alone. And most of the questions I'm seeing all have the same problem. We would probably spend an hour on each one of them. We are running out of time. I do want to leave everybody today with a couple of key takeaways. If you missed part of the conversation, I think one of the first things that you really need to consider is we talked a lot about acronyms and program status badges, and all of that landscape is important and it does matter. But I think if we've learned anything from today, those programs change, the map changes. What doesn't change is your underlying logic. You need a strategy that's going to work for you, whether or not any given program exists when you get to the point that you need it. The second key takeaway that I really hope you guys, if you remember anything, please remember FDA clearance it's not the starting point, or it's not the starting gun. It's where you're going to finish the race. This is a place where you're really just starting out. So just because you get FDA clearance does not mean you can turn around and make sales and have your product paid for tomorrow. It's really important that you understand this reimbursement side of things. Third, your evidence strategy, it has to serve multiple masters simultaneously. FDA, payers, health systems. These are not the same conversations, and you as a company cannot afford to optimize for only one of them. The fourth, and this one's from Brian, a breakthrough designation gets you in the room, but it will not close your deal. So think about some of the stuff that he had to say today, because I think it's going to be really important for you in your journey. And finally, know who you're selling to before you build what you're selling. We showed that stakeholder slide. That's not an org chart. It's your commercialization roadmap. Every decision that you're making should be traceable back to what each of those stakeholders needs to say yes. In closing, I'd like to thank Dr. Solow, Tonya, and Sam for bringing us 3 decades of real-world experience into this conversation today. Thank you all so much for being here who've joined us. If you want to go deeper in anything that we've covered, from regulatory strategy to reimbursement to market access, healthcare economics, et cetera, PRIA Healthcare is exactly the partner. That's why we're here. We're built for this work. So reach out to us at any time. We'll be happy to share the recording and the resources that we shared on the screen in a follow-up email later today. So go out and build something that gets to patients. That's why we're here. And thank you guys.
Thank you, Suzy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining.